The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a symbol of American air power during World War II, was a formidable bomber known for its durability and impressive payload capacity. Designed to withstand significant damage and still return home, the B-17 earned its nickname, Flying Fortress, through countless missions over enemy territory. It was a crucial asset for the Allied forces, conducting strategic bombing campaigns that targeted enemy infrastructure and military facilities across Europe. Stories of the B-17's resilience and the bravery of its crews are legendary, capturing moments of heroism and sacrifice in the skies. Among these tales is the remarkable story of a young pilot who, against all odds, led his damaged B-17 back to safety after a daring mission over France. This is the story of 2nd Lieutenant Richard L. Maggart and his harrowing flight on July 6, 1944. On July 6, 1944, 23-year-old 2nd Lieutenant Richard pilots a B-17G with tail number 423145 out of RAF Manston in Kent, UK. He was an experienced B-17 pilot, and this was his 24th mission. He was to lead the formation of B-17 bombers in their attack against the German V weapons plant in Oran, France. The Luftwaffe's head-on strikes over Germany often led to disastrous losses for the Allied B-17 aircraft. The B-17's poor armor against frontal strikes was a popular attack strategy. 2nd Lieutenant Richard's B-17, however, had an innovative B-17 equipped with an experimental chin turret with 650 caliber machine guns arranged in a close cluster under pilot control. This gave the B-17 8 M2 Browning machine guns, or the same amount of firepower as a P-47 Thunderbolt. At the head of the formation was Richard's B-17. Richard's B-17 carrying 1750 caliber machine guns. Flak opens beneath B-17 as they fly over Calais, France. The bomber's shutters pound loudly, and smoke shoots out of the inboard engine. Fuel leaks from wings holes. Richards cuts the engine to prevent fire and boosts the outboard engine to stabilize the bomber. The Luftwaffe gathered 3 squadrons of FW-190s consisting of 26 planes to counter Allied attack on the V-1 plant. They had never encountered a B-17 like the one at the head of the formation. 3 FW-190s can be seen arriving from the west side by Richards. He shatters the formation, glaring at them directly. The German observes a single, smoking B-17 and moves toward the front in an attempt to bring down the bomber. The B-17 aircraft with 850 caliber machine guns is attacked by German aircrafts, firing in close formation. The first FW-190 is destroyed, and the second German aircraft attempts to break away from the B-17's nose. Richard sets the second FW-190 on fire, but the third FW-190 escapes. The flak becomes heavier and hits the B-17 again on the port side wing, this time on the outboard motor. Despite losing balance, the B-17 stays in the air, with only 2 engines on one side of the wing operating. 6 FW-190s from a second squadron launch their attack from the north side. 2nd Lieutenant Richard's B-17 is turned to face approaching fighters, but struggles with controls. The 6 FW-190s form a close assault formation. The 850 cals tear through the combatants, but the FW-190s tear off the port side stabilizer and landing gear. Richard's B-17 plunges out of the formation and into a spiral. Richard, as an accomplished pilot, takes command of a bomber and cuts all engines before it reaches too high speed. He insists his crew remain on board until he is unable to operate the aircraft, preventing him from being taken prisoner in France. With only 1 engine remaining and significant combat damage, Richard tries to return home in his disabled B-17. The 9 members of his crew safely return home when he crashes and lands at the same airport where he took off from in Kent, England. Richard, as a World War II veteran, returned to Indiana, USA, where he retired and raised his family. He later returned to active duty to fight in the Korean War, flying F-86 Sabres. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with Oak Leaf Clusters, and European African Middle Eastern Service Medal. Richard passed away in Indiana on May 22, 2011. The B-17 Flying Fortress proved to be more than just a machine. It was a symbol of resilience and bravery for the crews who flew it. Stories like that of Second Lieutenant Richard Lee Maggart remind us of the extraordinary courage and determination displayed by these pilots and their crews. Their legacy lives on, inspiring future generations with tales of heroism and sacrifice in the fight for freedom. Among the most recognizable planes from World War II is the Swiss. This B-17D Flying Fortress, formerly known as Old Betsy, was a member of the crew who flew the first American bombing mission of the war. When an Australian repairman modified the B-17's tail to a smaller shark-shaped fin, the aircraft was officially dubbed the Swiss. Captain Weldon Smith was reminded by the tale of a well-known song about a troubled creature that was half geese and half swan. However, Colonel Frank Kurtz was the one who fell in love with the Swiss the most. Lieutenant General George Brett, the commander of the Allied Air Forces in Australia, took a personal interest in the aircraft and named his kid after it. They conducted several air combat flights together, but Chris was driven to create history and set out to break a few records. Developed in the late 1930s, Boeing's B-17 Flying Fortress was a four-engine heavy bomber that was used as a symbol of American air supremacy in World War II. It changed a lot over the years, becoming the third most manufactured aircraft, and variations from A to H were developed. The D variant had doubled guns, more armor protection, a reworked electrical system, and cowling flaps for better cooling. 18 C models were updated and 42 D models were constructed in all. Members of the 17 B-17 crew were awarded the Medal of Honor. The American Air Force's B-17 Flying Fortress became a symbol of America's air power. The airframe that would become the Swiss was the 38th B-17D model. On April 25, 1941, at Seattle, Washington, the Army Air Corps accepted the 38th B-17D model serial number 403097. The authorized model was shipped to Marshfield, California's 19 Bombardment Group, which used it to fly 21 Flying Fortresses to the Bay Area's Hamilton Field. The aircraft left California at 5-minute intervals and landed at Hickam Field, Hawaii, on May 20th, marking the first mass-coordinated landing of land-based aircraft. The aircraft touched down with less than 6 minutes gap between each other. The whole crew of the Boeing B-17 403097 was presented with a Distinguished Flying Cross. After getting to the Hawaiian base, Henry Godman joined the team as pilot and aircraft commander. The crew called their Flying Fortress Old Betsy after the plane traveled 600 kilometers to a pineapple farm in Mindanao. Old Betsy and another B-17 conducted the first U.S. bomber mission of the war, doing reconnaissance flights in and around Mindanao following the assault on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Old Betsy was escorted by Lieutenant Godman and his crew on a number of successful missions, which included a departure from Mindanao Island to attack Japanese soldiers encroaching on the Philippines. A mission's alternate target was the Davao Gulf, because to engine issues, while the original plan was to bomb the Lingayen Gulf in the northwestern part of the Philippines. The crew successfully dropped the bomb load utilizing lights and harbor movement in complete darkness, making a safe return to Bay on the last stage of the first U.S. night bombing strike of World War II. After moving to Java, Indonesia in December 1942, the B-17 bomber Old Betsy carried on with her combat sorties. The B-17's career came to an end on January 11, 1942, when it faced off against 3 Japanese fighters off the coast of Borneo. In order to give it a thorough makeover, its damaged tail was replaced with a smaller, shark fin-like tail, and new powerful engines were installed in Melbourne, Australia. The aircraft received the nickname Swiss after a well-known song about a half-swan, half-goose, when Captain Weldon Smith assumed pilot duties in February. Prior to returning to Melbourne for more repairs, the Swiss was in flight for a month. The Swiss was a better-maintained aircraft with a more modern radio system and weapons when it was taken over by Lieutenant General George Brett, who was in charge of the Allied Air Forces in Australia in 1942. Every month, Brett logged 150 hours of flying Swiss around Australia in the two battle zone aviation bases. Kurt set a new speed record in May 1942 when he flew from Sydney to Wellington, New Zealand. As Kurtz and his team flew from Wellington to Honolulu, they also beat their own speed record. The future U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson was among the well-known passengers on the B-17. In July, Brett was relieved of his command and took the Swiss back to the United States. The Swiss was the first American combat bomber to return from World War II's front lines. In 1943, Curtiss received a new Flying Fortress, which he named Swiss, and was appointed commander of the 463rd Bomb Group. The pilot named his daughter Swizzy after him. Swizzy Kurtz later became an actor. After the war, Brett continued using the aircraft to kill birds in the Pacific, flying it to South American and Caribbean countries before returning to the United States in 1945. General Brett retired, and Swiss was decommissioned by the Army at Kingman, Arizona. After World War II, the Swiss, a legendary aircraft with a track record of valiant sorties, was demobilized to be melted down to make aluminum. Pilot Frank Kurtz made arrangements with Los Angeles Mayor Fletcher Bauer to have the aircraft purchased and used as part of a war monument. In 1946, the Swiss was flown to Los Angeles Municipal Airport and placed inside a hangar. Budget cuts caused the memorial plans to collapse, and the airframe was stored until it was given to the Smithsonian Museum. After being restored in California, it was transported by air to a number of storage locations in Illinois and Texas until arriving at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland in 1953. Weather and vandalism caused serious damage to the aircraft, and by the mid-1970s, the Smithsonian had relocated the Swiss to an indoor hangar. Decommissioned in 2007, the Swiss was given to the National Museum of the United States Air Force by the Air and Space Museum. Later, in order to restore and show the aircraft, it was permanently relocated to Dayton, Ohio. The interior was removed, and the fuselage was treated for corrosion control as part of a comprehensive study that started in 2012. Other uses for the recognizable aft tail comb included machine gun storage. Machines that were absent were made by volunteer machinists. Due to higher priority projects in 2019, the restoration effort was put on hold for a while. A full restoration is still pending for the Swiss, which broke records and won the crew members over. In the spring of 1945, U.S. Army Air Forces intelligence officials obtained unanticipated reconnaissance photographs. Photographs were taken from Tachikawa, revealed a brand new, unidentified engineered aircraft. Unidentified Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, thought to have been used for research. It was only one of many examples of how the Japanese utilized the legendary American bomber to their advantage during World War II. On December 7, 1941, 12 Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses from the reconnaissance squadron left for Philippines from Hamilton Base, California. When they were flying through Pearl Harbor, what they thought was that they were receiving a salute, but in fact they got attacked, and 2 of the Boeing B-17 were completely destroyed. Two squadrons of the B-17 from Clark Field Base in Philippines were sent 600 miles south from the base in order to counter the Japanese attack on the Pearl Harbor. General Lewis H. Bradson, he wanted to send his aircrafts for patrolling flights. General Douglas MacArthur disapproved of the general's plan to use his flying fortresses to strike Japanese airfields in Formosa. When reports of an air strike started to arrive, arguments broke out. B-17s accompanying Warhawk fighters were destroyed by Japanese bombers before the sortie could be authorized. The Forest Air Force lost half of its aircraft in the first raid alone, and a majority of them were destroyed. Only 12 operational B-17 from the 19th Group remained 3 days later, and they were then transferred to Darwin, Australia. The field was then left at the mercy of the Japanese. In order to uncover Japanese technological advancements, a team of experts from GCAN, the Army Aviation Technical Research Agency, arrived in Philippines. From the debris, they found hints of E-models of B-17, but there were no E-models present at the Clark base. Japanese had modified the D models using the turbochargers. After gathering the different parts from the debris, Japanese started working on their own B-17, and soon after they built their own first prototype. By March 1942, Japanese took over the Java Island, Indonesia, from the Americans. Americans, while fleeing, thought they were leaving only scrap behind. Japanese, however, found 15 E-models wreckage, which helped them in further developing their B-17. Japanese took in locals who were working for the Allied forces to work for them and solve the mysteries of B-17. They also found a nearly reparable B-17E as well. When an aviation journalist visited Java Island base, he discovered that the Japanese had superb repair facilities given the circumstances. Another Japanese journalist wrote as, quote, "They have refined the subsystems to such a degree that a minimum of controls are needed in the cockpit. This function assists in the simplicity of flight controls and enables the pilot to focus on other duties that may be crucial in better scenarios." By the end of 1942, Japanese refurbished 2 B-17s and tested them. They were then sent to specialists in aeronautical engineering for further improvements. They also got hold of Norden bombsight, and after tests, Japanese came to a conclusion that their way of using it was far more effective than Americans. And so Japanese created the Nakajima G-8N bomber, which was an improved version of the B-17. Although they managed to perfect the design elements of the B-17s and armaments and guns, they could not produce an engine and turbocharger as developed by the Americans. However, they perfected the fire control system. They even created an automated gun sight system and improved the performance. However, they understood that they could not compete with the Americans due to lack of resources, insufficient supplies, and poor design in many parts. Due to quick conclusion of the war, the project was soon abandoned. 2 models were sent to Fusa Air Base for testing, and in 1944, 1 B-17 had an accident and was grounded. It is assumed that the fortress seen in reconnaissance photos at the Ogawa airport was this damaged aircraft. In May 1945, following a photo reconnaissance mission close to the Japanese capital, intelligence officials were shocked over a mysterious aircraft that looked to be 4-engine bomber of transport was captured on camera at the enemy's Army's Aviation Technological Research Institute, at Tachikawa Home Base. But till the end of the war, B-29s were harassing the Japanese aviation industry and preventing the production of aircraft. Further analysis revealed that the aircraft had a wingspan of about 104 feet and was subsequently given the code name Tachikawa Field 104. There are now relatively less clues as to the whereabouts of many of the fortifications that were taken. Heavy bombers used by the US and the Britain in the World War II were sitting ducks against Axis power, as they could not maneuver quickly and flew in predictable routes. These heavy bombers were being destroyed in great numbers, sometimes having over 20 or even 30% attrition rates. This was largely due to flak attack from the ground and German interceptors. The US and Great Britain had few fighters that could take off from England and pursue steeply into the Axis territory. This was largely due to the insistence of the US military officials that a heavily armed group of bombers in close formation, mainly in the combat box, could easily defend themselves. A lack of research in the long-range fighters, aircraft that could escort bombers to and from targets, led to massive losses of bombers over Europe. While some fighters, such as the P-47, could be equipped with drop tanks, these fighters could sometimes only go part of the way, while escorting Allied bombers before turning back, especially if encountering enemy fighters. During World War II, only a handful of fighters, for example, P-47, were equipped with drop tanks, and even then, they had to ditch them before going into the battle in order to not compromise their aerodynamic performance. Due to this reason, many early fighters being used as escorts, while lacking the fuel required to make it back to base, due to the confidence of the American military leadership and that the bomber would always get through even when flying without fighter support. Many planes, such as the P-38, were not initially built to be equipped with drop tanks. These planes were never designed for the previously produced B-17Fs, were striped to their bomb-carrying capabilities for this purpose, and instead used that load capacity to increase their defense, armament, and ammunition capacity. Promising escort planes such as the XP-61E and the XP-81 were converted from already in production planes, but either took too long or were insufficiently done. The bomber YB-40 was modified to carry over 1,000 pounds, over 11,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in its bomb bay. This is up from less than 4,000 rounds total for normal B-17s. The YB-40 can carry an additional 5 50 caliber heavy machine guns to the defensive armaments, going from the standard of 13 with the B-17 to a total of around 18 guns. In addition to the total projectile weight, the additional weight of the guns mounting for the guns and turrets also increased the gross weight for the plane from 54,000 pounds to 63,000 pounds. Some YB-40s had as little as 14 guns, while others had around 30 total machine guns and cannons of different calibers. This variability was largely due to the fact that the outfitting of the YB-40 was achieved after the plane had been built and delivered. Some also had additional turrets installed, and others still had additional waist gunners and locations installed. A total of 25 conversions were made from the B-17F bombers, with only 13 being deployed to combat in Europe. One of the standard edition was the Bendix Chin turret underneath the cockpit, being fitted with two 50 caliber heavy machine guns and was remotely controlled by an onboard computer. The others were kept stateside. On transit to Europe, one of the 13 YB-40 was crashed, and though repaired, never saw combat once delivered to the UK. In May of 1943, and assigned to the 327 Bomber Squadron, the YB-40 flew in total of 13 missions from May of 29, 1943 to July 29, 1943, being officially removed from the service shortly thereafter. Additional weight increase of the YB-40 over the fully loaded B-17F along with the drag created by the additional turrets in its waist gunner locations made it difficult to climb to the 20,000 feet, and it took nearly 48 minutes. It took a relatively speedy 25 minutes in the B-17F from which it was converted. Even once at altitude, they could hardly keep up with the fully loaded B-17, and after the bombs were dropped, the YB-40 escort planes could no longer keep up and fell out of formation with the planes that they were designed to escort. During the few missions that it flew, it was found to be good at defending itself, but not providing much additional value in defending other planes in the formation compared to the standard B-17. During their 2 months of active service, they shot down a total of 5 confirmed and 2 probable German fighters with the loss of just 1 YB-40. The conversion of a B-24 to the same purpose had serious technical issues and was abandoned after a single conversion was created. The YB-40 program did have an immense and positive impact on the development of the B-17. However, as the last 65 to 90 example of the B-17F that were built were equipped with the chin-mounted Bendix turret. With this being a standard feature on all the B-17 thereafter, the majority of the remaining examples were returned to the U.S. and other converted into trainers or group transport. YB-40 had somewhat unique armed and armored layouts that offset waist gunners were far more efficient, as well as improved tail gunner stations with much larger windows. Both of these features not only increased visibility for the gunners, but also the amount of sky that they could cover with their defensive fire as well. These became standard features on B-17 that came forward. After the war, Adolf Goland, an ace pilot and later chief of the fighters for the Luftwaffe himself, stated that the YB-40 was not worth the cost as it converted what could have been otherwise a heavy bomber into a gunship during World War II. It lacked the ability to carry bombs and lacked their performance to stave information and to do the job that they were built to do. Golan pointed again that the YB-40 was only able to shoot down 5 confirmed Luftwaffe fighters, with 2 additional being probable, all for the loss of 1 YB-40. Its contribution to the later B-17 undoubtedly made them more effective against enemy fighters, and as such, did have a sizable impact on Allied lives. The YB-40, which was created out of desperation, abandoned active duty only a few months after joining the battle. But its memory endured until the war conclusion, a legacy that made it possible for many Allied airmen to return home.
Let's dive into one of World War II's most gripping sagas, a tale of courage, resilience, and the unfathomable challenges faced by the crews of B-17 Flying Fortresses. On a routine return flight on August 7, 1944, Lieutenant George and his crew found themselves confronting a mysterious flaw that threatened their very survival. What ensued was a harrowing battle against fire and chaos, where bravery and ingenuity became their only lifelines. Let's unravel the remarkable story of B-17 Flying Fortress, nicknamed Full House, and her valiant crew, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of adversity. From the day they were introduced into service, B-17 Flying Fortresses harbored a perplexing flaw in their design, a flaw that led to some B-17s erupting into flames mid-air, resulting in the loss of their crews. The cause remained elusive, with few survivors to shed light on the matter. However, on August 7, 1944, during a routine return flight to base, the mystery surrounding this flaw finally unraveled. It was on this day that B-17G, bearing the tail number 4297797 and piloted by Lieutenant George, was among the convoy of 54 other B-17 Flying Fortresses and 29 P-51 Mustangs. After successfully completing a bombing mission over Poland, the formation descended to 10,000 feet. Full House and her crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, their day's work done. Waist Gunner Sergeant Larry Stevens, feeling the weight of exhaustion, removed his oxygen mask and began to ease away from his position. Suddenly, a fiery explosion erupted from the dorsal gunner's station, ripping through the B-17's sides and striking the portside engines with shrapnel from the spinning propellers, leaving a gaping gash in the fuselage. Despite the crippling damage, there remained a slim chance for the Fortress to limp back home on 2 engines, provided it encountered no further harm. The intensity of the fire surged into the cockpit like a relentless flamethrower, scorching Lieutenant George's skin and potentially impairing his vision. Both pilots cried out in agony, desperately summoning the gunner for fire extinguishers. Meanwhile, ball turret gunner Leo McCokey struggled to free himself from his position to offer assistance, while waist gunner Larry Stevens and navigator Langford hurried to retrieve the fire extinguisher. This inferno defied all expectations of an ordinary aircraft fire. The crew likened it to the ferocity of an ammunition explosion, yet there were no enemies or flak in sight, and the crew's guns remained silent. What could possibly have caused such devastation? As the fire spread rapidly throughout the front of the aircraft, Lieutenant George and co-pilot Ken Loeing made the split-second decision to bail out. Full House veered out of formation, descending into a steep 30-degree dive. Stephen, observing the parachutes of the pilot and co-pilot, realized that the Flying Fortress was now without its flight crew. Left with predominantly gunners, the remaining crew faced a critical choice: battle the blaze with fire extinguishers or opt for a bailout. Determined to reunite with their families and demonstrate the resilience of the B-17, they chose the latter, refusing to let the flames thwart their mission even in the absence of pilots. Crawling forward to avoid the choking fumes, Larry and McCokey discharged the fire extinguishers, gradually quelling the flames. As the intensity of the battle dwindled, they exchanged incredulous glances, pondering the cause of such a ferocious inferno. With no time to dwell on the mystery, the gunners swiftly shifted their focus to stabilizing the plummeting B-17. Lacking piloting expertise, they relied on their instincts to pull up the crippled Flying Fortress and steer it back towards the formation. Engaging the throttle at maximum capacity, they watched as the B-17 obediently banked to the right, realizing that both right side engines had been obliterated. Fortunately, the control surfaces remained fully operational, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. Through trial and error, the gunners discovered that maintaining the throttle at 70% and coordinating the rudder and elevator controls allowed them to correct the banking motion. This enabled the B-17 to maintain a steady flight path, using only the left engines while gradually descending. Remarkably, the gunners successfully navigated the wounded aircraft back to the formation and executed a safe landing. The crew marveled at their accomplishment, considering their lack of experience flying a B-17. Upon landing, the awaiting ambulance crew anticipated encountering a shaken and injured crew. To their surprise, the crew members waved off medical assistance and immediately turned their attention to investigating the puzzling fire that had threatened the aircraft. It was during this investigation that they made a chilling discovery. Each crew member was required to wear oxygen masks at high altitudes due to the unpressurized cabin of the B-17. Oxygen was supplied through large overhead hoses, with the main hose passing beneath the swiveling dorsal turret. Unfortunately, the constant movement of the turret gradually wore down the hose, eventually leading to a catastrophic loss of oxygen supply. This fatal design flaw had claimed the lives of many crews aboard older B-17s, often resulting in more violent explosions during such incidents. The crew of Full House found themselves in a dire situation as the B-17's oxygen levels dwindled. Remarkably, they became the first crew to survive such a perilous explosion, offering a rare opportunity for examination and understanding of the deadly flaw. Following the installation of new engines and the repair of its damages with fresh panels, Full House and its crew were back in action. During a bombing mission over Germany, the Fortress faced an onslaught from enemy German Bf-109s, which the formation managed to fend off. However, amidst the dense, flak-filled skies, Full House sustained severe damage to its right wing, triggering a sharp roll. This unfortunate turn of events led to a mid-air collision with a friendly B-17 known by the nickname Wrinkled Belly Baby. Both aircraft, listed in the missing aircrew report 8,175 and 8,176, reported their crews as killed in action. Tragically, none of the 20 men aboard either plane were ever sighted again.
Check out our playlist on the B-17 Flying Fortress, with more than a dozen videos covering many different aspects of this legendary aircraft. Thanks for watching.